we're continuing the topic of hiring and testing and looking to see what jobs could be germane to have testing on them. One of the areas is drug testing, and we have a new wrinkle in the workplace in the aspect of alcohol has been legal, and alcohol really is a drug, and people can become addicted to it. How do you go about dealing with that if you have somebody there? I've been trained formally as to how to deal with addiction, but with all that aspect, now we have injected into our society in at least 37 states that allow some type of usage of marijuana. 21 states, recreational use. 37 states have medicinal use. So the medicinal use, sometimes if you see exactly how they obtained their prescription for it, a lot of it is online and based upon the statements of the person who really needs the marijuana. From a practical perspective, 37 states allow that, and I would foresee eventually the U.S. government may allow it, but as of the time of this recording, it does not. That means that if you have a federal contract and you have employees using marijuana and they fail a drug test on marijuana, you may have to terminate their employment because of the fact that federal law has not changed. When it does change, that'll be something different. You also have to deal with the aspect of the Americans with Disability Act. With that, a doctor can prescribe something, it might actually be a reasonable accommodation, and you'll have to sit down and look and see exactly what is the accommodation, is it germane to the job, how often does the employee use it, certainly not on the job, so you pay attention to what is the aspect of what it's used for, and you should have full disclosure from employees, especially if you're a federal employer that deals with federal contracts. The polygraph. It measures biological reactions between people based upon their breathing and also their heart rate. It's respiration, cardiac activity, perspiration. I went through one of these one time for a formal security clearance with Washington, D.C. I have to tell you, it was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. That person on the other end had no business asking me those questions. It was really terrifying. So I don't recommend it. Now, the text that we were using has pretty much what I would call a full-blown bias against this aspect over here. They claim it's only accurate 50 to 90% of the time. That is not what the data really shows. For the most part, most tests will have an 87% accuracy. You can bump it up to 92% accuracy if you use a special format in the process. But with all that, it's pretty rare that you're ever going to use a polygraph because really Congress sat there and has an act and they says, you cannot do it. It's called the Polygraph Act. So for the most part, if you have an employee take a lie detector test, you can't do it if they don't want you to do it unless there's certain conditions. If they're involved with the security job and you have appropriate certification with somebody coming in, there are certain jobs you can do that. Recommend you actually go back, read the law thoroughly to see if it applies to your area. But if you're having armored cars, if you have alarmed guard services, if you sell drugs, legally, okay, if you have a legal selling of drugs, okay, then you sit down and you could probably have some ability to use the polygraph. If you are a government agency, you have every legal right to sit down and use a polygraph. So with that, if something goes on, you can bring them in for that. One time I had an issue where I says, if I don't get what happened in the situation, I will resort to polygraph test. You can't do that. Well, yes, I could because of, and I cited a different requirement. So always sit down and take a look at this as an option. If you have some type of security issue, if you are a government agency, you may well have the right to use it, but especially if you're involved in security services. Genetic tests. This is one of the weirdest laws, and the fact that we even have to have it, I find appalling. It's called the GINA Act, so the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. It's a focus on women, and women, the insurance companies, if your company provides medical insurance for your employees, insurance companies were requiring all employees to go through a genetic information test to find out if the woman that was being hired had a genetic predisposition for breast cancer. If they did, if they had family members of it, they would refuse to extend insurance coverage for that employee. For the life of me, I'm not very fond of having government interfere into the private sector, except this is one of those moments where I just kind of roll my eyes and says, oh my gosh, please pass a law to make this illegal. And they finally did in 2008. It really strictly limits disclosure of genetic information, and it also reduces the ability of an insurance company to try to sit there and deny people coverage because their parents, their mother, or their aunt may have had some type of breast cancer. What an awful type of reason, and of all things in capitalism, I find that kind of appalling, but that's a personal opinion. Here's the law, so make certain that you're paying attention to that. It doesn't apply to employers of fewer than 15 people or people in the military. However, 38 states do concur with the ban by statute. So that's out there. Make certain you're complying with that if it's germane to your business and you have 15 or more employees. Testing considerations. There's really different kinds of approaches to it. Establish mandatory testing if you feel there's a critical need. Coming from an area where I came from a public school as an administrator, I had a series of bus drivers. I wanted to make certain my students were transported safely all the time. Do you realize what a tough job that is? You have bus drivers, an awful lot of them are women, okay, and they have this awful schedule at the beginning of school, before school, and after school, and then different activities. The schedule is fragmented. It's difficult to sit down and schedule them. But on top of that, if you could imagine driving a bus and you have 90 children on the bus, no adults, and you have to control them while you're driving down the street through a rearview mirror that's above you. It's one of the most difficult jobs I could possibly contemplate. So with that, I want to make certain that whoever I have behind that steering wheel really knows their stuff and has paying full attention to what's going around them, in front of them, side of them, and behind them. Not behind them on the bus, but behind them, behind their seat. So that's a critical aspect of it. To make certain there's probable cause for testing. Sometimes if you have a major theft, you may put your employees through some type of polygraph testing if you have the appropriate clearance to do so. So that's an issue as well. If you have money missing and you're working in the business office, that's another time. There's several other different things for suspicion that are just common sense. If you have somebody that works in accounting and they work a massive amount of overtime and never take a vacation, alarm bells need to go off. But that's a different chapter. Some employers can actually have random testing. If you have people involved in the transportation business, random testing is pretty common in the area. Always look on the cost benefit, the corporate culture, local laws, see what it's all about, do some reading. The class is called employment law. It doesn't mean you're going to know all the employment law, but I'm guiding you in the right direction. When you have a testing program, make certain it's germane to the job and that you can legally do it. From a federal perspective, it complies with things like the polygraph law, but also what it is in your locality as well. Polygraph, drug, pre-employment testing, random testing, like for bus drivers, pre-employment, some of the testing that you may have, you want to make certain that they can actually do the job. One thing that I've done is background checks. Background checks is a type of testing, making certain that you're checking with their previous employer, that their job title, hopefully you're already doing that, except for the fact every once in a while you'll get some type of different aspect of it. In my case, I was required to make certain they could not hire anybody convicted of certain sex crimes. I had to run deep background checks through the police department that we had, and so with that I run a background check. One time I had somebody come back and they basically were guilty of pedophilia, and it wasn't caught in the system. They weren't prosecuted. A private company confiscated their computer because that was on there. We extended employment. We had pending the outcome, and we withdrew that as well as part of the pre-employment screening that we had. Make certain you're doing it and it's germane and that you're consistent in its application for every applicant. Take care.